Good day and welcome to another Radio 5 broadcast from Deerport Station. I'm John Detweiler, your mystery reading host. Of Old Henry. It was a cold night, raining hard as I schlepped into the gym with a soaked sweater, ragged from too many nights on the street. Henry takes a look at me and says, "Dry off, but you're early." "Thanks for that. Have a seat." He disappears around the corner to a small kitchenette and returns with a steaming cup of roasted brew. My bones felt the warmth before I ever touched the cup. Henry says to me, "There you go. We'll warm up before we warm up today, and we'll discuss the virtues of the fitting, proper punching bag." Old Henry had once been young Henry, of course, and young Henry, training for his first big fight, had needed something to wipe away the sweat. The red towel, it hadn't been ragged then, it had been redder, and when she gave it to him, she put a spritz of her perfume on it, saying, "Think of me, in your corner, after the first round." In how many fights had he used the towel to wipe himself dry? He still imagined he could smell her perfume there. The greenest leaf. It was in a hunk of rock the size of a fist, that petrified leaf. Out of the whole bunch of leaves she kept, this was the finest by far. He asked her once, with the brimming curiosity only a fresh young mind can offer, why the other leaves turned brown. She quietly explained that all the other leaves had lost their water, the sun and the earth. That's why they turned brown. They smiled at each other. He often reached up to touch the leaf in the rock, and each time he did, her heart ached a bit. She would recall a hidden fear, the way only an aged mind can remember, and so the day her little boy knocked it off the mantel, thunk, it hit with a crack you could hear all over the house before it split in two. She was so furious. He was so upset. There was nothing one could do to fix it, she told him. It was one of those accidents you just had to live with. Later, trying to find something, anything that would suture it together again, it struck her that the leaf, when it first fell from that prehistoric tree, had made no such noise, none like the one petrified. The past adds weight to things, she thought, hoping the boy had already forgotten how angry she had been. The Three Reds. They called them the Reds. They did have a couple pairs of red sneakers between them, and they did have red patches on their clothes. I wasn't there when they got the name, but once the naming was done, it stuck to them, like glue. They jaunted around town, moving from house to house, making their rounds. People weren't all afraid, as I was, but I knew what they were, the three of them. One tall and gangly, with big teeth. Another plain with black hair, dark as night. The third was the most striking, the only one with fire-red hair and a mean look, as if your mind was just as plain as newspaper for reading. Eyes that could tear you down in a glance. I felt a shiver any time their look passed over me, but I knew their secret. People smiled at them and made them feel welcome, but I suppose that was their way of politely keeping distance. Each day that passed seemed like a tick on the clock, and each day the Reds were moving closer and closer. On this particular morning I awoke to strange sounds. A commotion was brewing outside. I threw on an old pair of jeans and a shirt. Once I opened my front door, it was as clear to me, clear as the blue sky. The local grocer, Donald Blythe, did not show up to open his shop that day. I stood on my front porch, watching as the huddled mass hummed and hawed as to why poor Donald would leave with no mention or word. If they could only see what I saw. Off in the distance I could barely make out the distinctive red shoes, now slung over their shoulders by the laces, each of the three ladies smiling in that self-satisfied way. No use in saying it now, but I believe Donald Blythe found out firsthand what I had suspected from the outset. I kept my distance, not wanting to add to the town's troubles or cause a stir. I took up my post and kept a watchful eye as the three Reds headed down the road and out of town. The time James missed it. Running as fast as I could along the deck, I looked behind me to see if James was close. So fixed was I upon my pursuer that I ran, smack, into the captain. A snort, a frown, and a sharp reprimand later, I sulked back to deck chairs and sat glaring unpleased at the horizon. So far stretched the sea that I couldn't perceive the end. But it must have had one, because just then a little cloud peeked over the horizon, just beginning its day. A whispered out of bed sleepy head, and behold, it smiled at me. I couldn't say just how it had done, but I smiled back as if I couldn't stop. Just then James jogged up near me, saying, "What did I miss?" Tarnished. Tarnished antique copper vases sit and mumble to themselves. Wrinkled finger gently traces smiles in dust on empty shelves. Friendly keeper greets the day with gracious nods as neighbors enter, scouring each full-burdened aisle to find an answer at the center. A trinket for an empty hand, a book can fill an empty mind, a man can fill an empty chair, a hat may call a head refined. A cold distraction enters fast, but what about the empty soul? What thing can bring the mind to peace? What trinket makes the being whole? In the end, a broken body takes a final withered breath, and finds the things that kept attention brought the withered man to death. The Crown of Lowpoke Township. Felt Hall goes overlooked by most. As a facility, it has rooms enough for the 3 courses offered and space enough for half a dozen desks in each. There's only business, agriculture, and accounting, but there is a student leadership council that meets on Wednesdays, and I take minutes. That's the sum of it. All the other young people my age are farmers' sons, and the like. The backbone of the community, they say, and I agree. Lowpoke Township has no debt, a prosperous and close-knit farming community, and a drive-in cinema open on the weekend. They've been showing The Thief of Tunisia for 3 weeks now, but nobody minds. I come out with everybody, primarily for the fresh vanilla ice cream, brought in by the barrel straight from the Ritters, but recently I've been wandering off as the film starts rolling. Last week I was coming back down Main Street. John Copp was rocking on his side porch watching the top half of The Thief of Tunisia over his fence, and he stopped me. "Ain't you should be at the picture, Ben?" he asks. "I'm all right," I say. "Already had my ice cream, and I've seen this one." He gave me such a frown. The pucker at the side of his mouth was disappointment, but I think the furrow in his brow was pity. "Have a good night, John," I said. But he prodded. "Where you going anyway?" "Oh, down to Felt Hall, I guess," I said. He wasn't frowning anymore. But he looks at me for a long second, and he leans forward in his rocker. He just leans and leans, until I thought he would fall straight out of it. I see his hands shaking as he pressed down on the armrests. I take a step toward the porch and put my hand on the railing. I lifted up my eyebrows and met his eye, but he was looking down now. Then he slides his foot out real slow, way out in front of him, like he was a dancer or an acrobat, and he just rises up like the earth had no hold on him at all. "Well, here," he says, "it's locked up for the weekend. I better get you the key." And he waved me up, shuffled swiftly over to his front door. I took a deep breath as I stepped onto the porch. He reached in and grabbed the ring from a hook. The one key was hanging from it. Also a white tag clearly labeled Felt Hall dangled from a string next to it. He handed me the ring, and he did a kind of shuffle dance back to his rocker as I stepped down and headed toward Felt Hall. I grinned, and then a smile broke over me. Not just my face, mind you. I felt like my whole self was smiling. Smiles coming right out of my fingertips. As I get down to Hickory and turn left, I'm just looking down the way, and it struck me. Years back, Felt Hall was the only building on this side of Hickory. From Maine, it was just rows of trees on either side, and the hall sitting proudly at the end of it. A flagpole, Old Glory waving, and the quiet majesty of Felt Hall. I felt suddenly crowded by the houses, though there were only 4, 2 on each side. The trees were still alive and growing, but it seemed right then that there was less air for breathing and a bit less road to walk on. But I kept going. I get down to the Circle Drive and walk around the flower bed and stop. I look up. The 4 pillars standing in the entryway were soiled with age, but flawless still in their shape. The scroll at the top made me wonder whose idea it was to use that particular shape. This was the only building I'd ever seen made this way. I looked at the doors and the frame around them and wondered who thought a door should be ornamented. The hall isn't the largest building in town, but I don't think anyone would disagree it's the finest made. I go over to the door and press against it as I turn the iron key. The sound of the struck lock bolt reverberated around me as the door unlocked, and I smiled again. I open the door and this air rushes out over me. I notice how different it feels than the air outside. It was a cold, hard air, and it came with 3 smells that I could tell at the time. One was a bitter smell, the cleaner used on the floor. I know it's supposed to smell like trees, but it doesn't. Nothing smells like trees but trees. The second I noticed was metallic. It smelled like the chairs, the railing, the drinking fountain, and the well water. I can't put a finer point on that, but you'd know the smell if you smelled it. The last smell was my favorite. It was the musty, dusty, tangy smell of paper and binding, books, charts, and maps. Not altogether pleasing, but I've come to know it as belonging to this place. That moment, standing in the doorway, having opened it myself, that stayed with me, and I wondered if anyone else thought the thoughts that I had, or noticed the craft of each piece of the place as I did. Don't know if that's a question that needs answering. Nobody's ever said anything to me on the subject, but for my part, and for all the rest of Lowpoke, Felt Hall is to me its crown and its majesty. Thank you for joining me on this mystery reading. I'm John Detweiler. Good day.